All right, as folks are coming back, if you have any questions or anything that came up, feel free to just kind of chime in. Again, tonight is about kind of the overview introduction to all of this. Obviously, you can take as much time as you want going forward to kind of explore each of these things more, but I want to just make sure to have kind of on record and on a video sort of going through each of these things so we've got a reference point to go back to. But so, we're able to create a project, get a sprite or two in there, um, play around with the looks of the sprites, costumes, any issues that came up that I can help to address at this point.
I have a quick question.
Yeah.
If you have a sprite that has like four movements, say it's a walker, is there a way if you did a costume change in like the first view of it to carry that through all the other variations of it, or do you need to do that costume change for each variation?
Yeah, if it's one that where the costumes already exist, then yeah, you would have to go in and kind of adjust each one. If you were creating it from scratch, what you would do is create the first costume, then you can duplicate a costume. If you right click on a costume, it'll give you a duplicate option. So then you'll have an exact duplicate. Then you can modify that one for the second pose, modify for the third pose. But yeah, it doesn't know, there's no design connection between costumes where if you change one here, it then knows to put those changes through the rest. Like that would require a much more sophisticated animation program to do. So that can be tedious. And I've had that happen where I've built a whole series of costumes and then decided that I needed to change something and I have to go through and basically do the same change on every single one. It's just what it is. Sometimes it's easier just to delete all the other costumes and just rebuild them from the initial one again. But so good question.
Yeah,
Good question.
thank you.
Yep. All right. I think what I'm going to do, because I'm looking at the time, and I know I said we were not going to go past 7, and I still want to achieve that for sure. Is I'm going to kind of combine the other two segments of tonight together, and maybe give you a little bit of time to look through them, but maybe more sort of answer questions as we go. But the good thing about what the other two things tonight is that they're all basically the same thing. It's just that each one does a different something. But once you understand how the programming or how the code blocks work in Scratch, at that point, it's really all just about learning what each of the blocks does. And in general, Scratch is pretty good about labeling the blocks with names that make sense. They're not using, in most cases, really specific programming language kind of terminology. If something changes a costume, the block says change costume. If it's move it somewhere, it says move to. So once I think you get an idea of how the programming blocks function, I think we can move through sort of what each block does pretty quickly. So I'm just going to kind of combine the looks and the event blocks pieces together so that we can still get out of here in about within 40 minutes or so. So jumping back over to my friend the Scratch Cat here, we've been looking at costumes. What I'm going to do now is, being clicked on the Scratch Cat, is I'm now going to click on the code tab. And I'm also going to minimize this so I get a little bit more space here. So when you click on the code tab, this is the programming piece. And this is where I know in a lot of your comments this week, there were several people who said, like, this seems like an awful lot. I don't know, how this would work into my classroom because we have to, we'd have to have all the time to teach it and everything else. The idea behind Scratch is it's a programming language. So you can use this either, I'm going to teach this platform to my students so they can create things, or you can use it yourself to create things, which then your students can interact with, or it can be used as a platform for, just teaching what programming is about. So this can be used in a lot of different ways. And one of the things that I think they've implemented really well is the whole idea of how you program in this. And the whole idea is that it's basically like Lego bricks, where you just stack Lego bricks together, and each of those bricks does something for that sprite. So the code is always attached to a sprite, and whatever that code says to do will be what that sprite does when that code runs. So when you open up the code tab, you have all of the coding blocks that are available, but they color code them into kind of categories. So all we're going to look at tonight is purple and yellow, the bright yellow. There's also kind of an orangey yellow. So purple and bright yellow, that's looks and events. And then we'll look at the others another time. So this is also a way to kind of pare down. So in terms of looks, right off the bat, the first block here, when you look at it, it literally says, say hello for 2 seconds. Plain English. And that is literally what the block will make your sprite do. So if that's what I want it to do, I'm going to grab that, just click on it, and I'm going to drag it over here into my programming window and just drop it. So that is now a bit of code that is attached to this sprite. If I want to see it work right now, I just click on the block and it will run. It says hello, 2 seconds, it disappears. I know it's kind of small. Let me just make this a little bigger for a second. It says hello, and then it disappears. So I've just programmed my first program because now it's interactive. When I click on that bit of code, my sprite says something, and then 2 seconds later it disappears. In any of these blocks where there are these white circles or ellipses, that's a place where you can change the parameter. So maybe instead of hello, I want it to say Guten Morgen if it's German. All right, changed it. Now when I click on the block, my cat says Guten Morgen. All right, maybe I wanted to say it for 5 seconds. I changed the 2 to 5. Now when I click on it, it says Guten Morgen for 5 seconds, and then it disappears. So essentially every block functions like that. It's a single instruction. The instruction, when you click on it, will do what it says it does. Sometimes that's something that happens visually. Sometimes it's something more that just happens in the background. But that is the basics of how the programming works in Scratch. If I want it to do more than one thing in a row, I grab the block and I drag it out and I click the blocks together and they will snap together. When you get them close, you'll see that gray, and when I let go, it snaps the 2 blocks together. So now I have 2 instructions where the first instruction will run and then it'll immediately follow the second instruction. So I'll say V Gates and I'll have it say that for 4 seconds. So now when I click on this, it'll do the first instruction, Guten Morgen, 5 seconds. And then for 4 seconds, it'll say V Gates. And you can see my code has a little yellow outline while it's running. That just tells you something is running right now. And that's that. So building code is basically just about finding the instructions you want, dragging them into the programming window, and if you want multiple instructions to happen, you click them together. Now I can have other blocks of instructions. So for instance, the next 2 are think, and the only difference with thinking is that it puts it in a thought bubble instead of in a speech bubble. So if I pull think out here and I don't snap it together, this is now a separate instruction that I can run separately. So I can just click on it and the cat will just say hum for 2 seconds. Or if I click on this one, it goes back and runs that one. So each sprite can have as many different little sets of instructions as you want. So you're making a game board. Maybe a sprite needs to move right 4 spaces, or it needs to move left 4 spaces, or up 4 spaces, or down 4 spaces. You can set that up as 4 different sets of instructions. And when each one is run, the sprite will do that thing. So that's basically how all of this works. All right, does that make sense? It's meant to be very visual and as much as possible in plain English. So if I just read this like it was a paragraph, it says, say Guten Morgen for 5 seconds, say V Gates for 4 seconds. In plain English, that describes exactly what the sprite is going to do. So they try to do that. So now I think relatively quickly, I can go through the rest of these purples because again, they pretty much all do exactly what they say. So you've got the say and the think. Um, what I should say is the ones that just say hello or think something. When those run, it will stay there forever. If you want it to go away, like right now he's saying hello. If I need it to say nothing, I'll put in a say and I'll make the say blank. And then when I click on it, that'll make the speech bubble go away. Otherwise, it will say hello forever for as long as the program's running. So that's just a little quirk with those. So say and think. You can't control the size of the text or anything like that. It does all that automatically, but it's an easy way to get a sprite to do some dialogue. Then you get a series of instructions that are all about the costumes and the backdrops. And again, they do exactly what they say. So the first one says switch costume to, and then there's a pull down. And it will give you a list of all the costumes that that sprite has available. So I could say switch to costume 2. When I click on the block, it switches to costume 2. Yes, I went in and altered the sprite, the scratch cat a little bit during the break. So now he looks a little scared and surprised. All right, or I could have it go back to costume 1, run it, it goes back to costume 1. The ones that just say next, again, they do exactly what they say. When it gets clicked, it'll go to whatever the next costume is in the list of costumes. So that's a way to very quickly go through a whole series of costumes. I'm just clicking next, 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 next. If it gets to the end, it loops back to the beginning of the costume. So a lot of times when you see a character animate where it's walking, it's just going through a series of costumes one after the other in kind of a loop. So that's that. And then there's 2 for the backgrounds too. So if you have multiple backgrounds, you can also switch to a particular background or just switch to the next background. So that's a set of them. These next ones are all about now changing some of the characteristics of the sprite. So I can change the size. So I could say change size by, that means it'll take whatever size it is now, and then it'll either increase it, or if you put a negative number in, it'll decrease it. So right now, every time I click this, the cat will get bigger by 10%. Oh, he's getting closer, he's getting closer. Put in -10. Now every time I click it, it gets smaller. So that is something that you can code. You can also just set the size to a certain value. So if you don't want to just increase or decrease and just say go right to size number 5 or whatever, you can put that in as well. And it even says set size to blank %. You fill that in. You can also change to a certain extent. They have a couple of effects that are built in. So there's a color effect where it'll attempt to recolor the sprite in a different color. That generally works better when the sprite is all one color to begin with. And then there's a series of other effects that kind of warp the image some. So like there's a whirl effect. And when I click on that, the Sprat Cat starts to go into a whirlpool shape. Oh, sorry, Sprat Cat. He doesn't look very comfortable now. Um, there's a ghost effect, and that's really transparency. So that gradually makes the sprite get more and more transparent. So you can kind of make things fade out by making them get more transparent. Um, so you've got that, and you can pick which of the effects you want, and then how much you want it to change by. Or again, you can just set a particular effect to a particular value. So maybe that ghost effect, I want to get rid of it. I'm going to turn it back to 100. Oops, that means I need to set it to 0. So now Spratcat is back. Or I could change the color effect to 20. And now Spratcat's kind of green instead of orange, right? But the nice thing about these is they're not changing the costume. They're just, this is an effect that's added on top of it. So the costume hasn't been changed. And you can always go back to it by just saying clear graphics effects, and it'll take it back to its regular costume. And that's another one of these blocks. And then the last four here, again, all of these pretty much say what they do. You have a show and a hide. Running out of space here. And those do exactly what they say. I can hide the sprite, I can show the sprite. And you can build that into a program. And then the last two have to do with that idea of layering that we were talking about when we were drawing the sprites. The sprites themselves also are in layers. So if you have a lot of objects on the screen and you need one of them to be behind the other one, then you can use these, and you can either say go to the front or the back layer, or you can also move them forward or backward one layer at a time. So I don't know, if you have a whole bunch of playing cards on the screen that are all overlapped, if somebody turns over one of those cards, you might need that sprite to come to the front as it does so. But again, those block instructions just do exactly what they say. And those are all of the look things. Those are all of the purples. For now, you will see in some of the categories, these that are a different shape, they're in ovals. Don't worry about those right now. That gets into something we'll talk about down the road when we start talking about variables and some other things. For now, just look at the ones that kind of have that block shape where they obviously snap together. So these are all things that you can put into a program, and either, now that these are all in here, each time I click on one of them, it'll do that thing, so I can just kind of go through them and click on each one at a time and have it do each of those things. Or I could, as I showed, you can combine a whole bunch together and have a whole series of instructions run just by clicking on the block of instructions. So is that relatively clear in terms of how those work? I think Scratch does a pretty good job of turning programming language into plain English. So when in doubt, just read what the block says and kind of listen to what it says, and it should pretty much give you the information that you need in terms of what that particular block does. I should point out, if you need to delete a block, if the block is all by itself, the easiest way to delete it is just to drag it back over to the left. And when you do that, it'll just kind of disappear it. You can also right click on a block and you will get duplicate or delete. So if you need a whole bunch of the same one, you can also just do it by duplicate, duplicate, duplicate. But that's also a way to delete a block by doing it that way. Be careful if blocks are connected together. Sometimes they behave a little weird. If I say delete block, oh, that time it worked okay. I've sometimes had it where blocks are connected, and when you delete a block, it kind of deletes a whole series of blocks that are all connected. So sometimes you have to disconnect the blocks apart, delete the one you want, and then put the remaining blocks back together. Which again is kind of like Legos. You need to get rid of that red in the middle. You've got to separate it out, get rid of it, put the other ones back together when you're done. All right. So that's all of the looks. That's all of the looks blocks. That's in terms of the mini project this week. Those are all of the things that you will be using in terms of getting your sprite to do certain things. The other category I want to look at, which is a much shorter category, is the events category. And these don't tell your sprite what to do. These tell a piece of code to run. Right now, I've been running them all by clicking on them. But obviously, if somebody's using your program, they're not going to be looking at the code and clicking on bits of your code to get things to run. They're going to be out here and they're going to be clicking on the cat or clicking on the dog or pressing a key on their keyboard. And so we want to be able to run all of these instructions by sort of remote control, if you will. And that's what events are. Most of the events have this little curved shape on the top. They call it a hat or a top hat. And the reason that they're that shaped is this has to be the top instruction. These have to go at the top, and then the instructions go underneath, or the code goes underneath. So these are meant to sit at the top of a stack. So let me go back to that Guten Morgen. And let's say that I want this to happen when somebody clicks on the sprite. All right, that seems reasonable. They're in here. I want them to do something. I click on it. So when I look at my possible events, one of them literally says when this sprite clicked. I guess they could have put the word is in there if they wanted the English to be a little better, but it says when this sprite clicked. I drag that and I click it on top of this. So now if I read this as a paragraph, it says, when this sprite clicked, say Guten Morgen for 5 seconds. And that is exactly what will happen. I come out here, I click on Mr. Cat, says Guten Morgen for 5 seconds, and then it goes away. And I knew it was running because over here, the code got surrounded in yellow. That's the way of showing me that that's the bit of code that's running right now. So I now have made a remote control for that piece of code. I've now made the cat interactive. Now my user does something to the cat and the cat does something back. And that's kind of the whole point of code, is to get things to do things when users tell them to do them. So, the other ones, again, they're all relatively self-explanatory with maybe the exception of the last one, which I'll talk about a little separately. There's when the green flag is clicked. The green flag has a special place in Scratch. That is the start button. That is the way people will start your program when they go to the project page. In here, we have the green flag sitting up at the top so we can test it. So usually green flag instructions are the things that need to happen right when the program begins. So it's usually a lot of putting a sprite in a particular place or resetting a scoreboard or moving things back to a start position. Those kinds of initial activities. Generally, once a program's running, then you don't push the green flag again because then that'll restart the program all over. But you have that as an option as a way to start something. So, I could have it say hello when I click the green flag. Click the green flag, says hello. Now I need to get rid of it. Bye. The next one is if you want keyboard interaction. It starts off by just saying when space pressed or space key pressed, but when you pull down the menu, you've got all 4 arrows, up, down, right, and left. You have an option for any. Be careful of that because that literally means anytime they push a key, this will happen. And then it just goes through the alphabet and the number keys. So you can't use like the special keys or like the punctuation keys. It's only the letters, the numbers, the arrows, or the space bar. But generally speaking, that's usually gives you enough. So this would be a way to have something different happen depending on what key they press. So maybe I'll use the up arrow And where's that change size? So I'm going to say, I'm going to put my change size I'll go back to making it get bigger. So now when I push the up arrow, cat should get bigger. All right. If I want him to get smaller, then what I need to do, actually, I'll do a duplicate. So now I've got a second copy of those two instructions. I'll change the up arrow to down arrow, and I'll change the positive 20 to minus 20. Now when I click the down arrow, cat gets smaller until he goes away. All right. So that one is really useful because you really get to determine what the key interaction is on the keyboard. So when the flag, when the space bar, when the sprite is clicked, you've got all three of those. This next one is when the backdrop switches to. I personally have never used that one. Where I guess it's useful is if you have like a multi-stage game that maybe you set it up so that when you go to a certain backdrop, certain sprites turn on or something like that. So it's there. I've personally never used it, but you link it to one of the backdrops, and then whenever that backdrop becomes the active backdrop, then that instruction will run for this sprite. So that's just another option. Another one I've never used is this one. You can choose between loudness or timer. Um, but, again, that just means, if a timer gets started, when that timer reaches a certain count, then it will execute this instruction. Loudness, that requires the interaction through a microphone. That's not always reliable. So I've never personally used that one. And then the last group here, and this is the last thing for tonight. So these last ones have to do with messages. And what messages are is they're like having a back channel of communication inside your program so that sprites can talk to each other without the user's involvement. So, for example, I might want to have something that when this dog gets clicked on, maybe the dog moves, gets bigger, and the cat changes its costume into that surprised look. So what I would do there is on the dog, I would have a when this dog clicked, and I would tell the dog to get bigger, and I would maybe move the dog to another location. But then I would also have the dog broadcast a message, and I can decide the name of that message. It doesn't really matter. It's not an actual text message, it's just a name. So let's say the message is surprise. Then on the cat, I would have this one which says, when I receive message, and I'll just leave it as message 1, go to costume 2. So it's not that the cat's interacted with, it's that one of the other sprites says, oh, that other sprite should do something. So I'll demonstrate this really, really quick. I'll go to my dog. I'll say when this sprite is clicked, I'll go back to my looks and I'll just say set size to, let's make it super big, 400, and broadcast message 1. So when I click on the dog, dog's going to get really big, and the dog sprite is going to send out message 1. And it's okay, it's called message 1. Scratch Cat is going to receive message 1 and is going to switch to its second costume. Let's see if it works. Here I go. I'm going to click on the dog. Oop, it worked. Dog got huge, cat got scared. So those two sprites just talked to each other in the background. You can set up as many messages as you want. If if you want different things to happen, if you want a different one, you click on this and you just say new message. It'll ask you what you want to name the message, and then you can use that anywhere else in the program too. So that's just a way to have sprites send triggers to each other. Is that all right? So to boil it all down to simplify it. What we did tonight was get an introduction to the basic Scratch platform. We learned how to make pretty pictures, sprites, backgrounds. Sprites can have multiple costumes, you can have multiple backgrounds. We learned how to draw them, we learned how to kind of work with that. And now we also have this introduction to coding where we can start to make those sprites do things by building a set of instructions and then triggering that set of instructions through a variety of different ways. So that is as far as we're going to take Scratch this week. Questions? All right. What I'm going to do in the interest of time is rather than giving you some time right now to try this out, I'll just encourage you over the next day or so to find a little time to kind of go through this stuff. And any questions you have at all, just send them right to me and I'll try to get back to them as soon as I can and help you out. But I think the more you play with it, the more it's going to make sense, right? You can basically just say a set of instructions in your head and then find the blocks that say the things that you just said you want it to do. Like you just heard me say, when I click on the dog, I want the dog to get big and I want the cat to look scared. That was my sentence. The coding was, when this sprite clicked, change size to 400%, send this message out to the cat. The cat takes the message and goes to its surprise costume. So basically, I'm taking a plain old English description and I'm just turning it into a series of messages. So that's really all that this coding is about, is finding the right blocks, snapping them together, and then having them do things on the screen. Okay, so I'm going to leave that for now. Do find a chance to explore it. You are going to have a mini project with this week, which I'm going to explain in just a second. But just even on your own, just poke around in it. Some of you, I can already see some of the gears turning of like, ooh, it would be fun to try to do this or something like that. Feel free. You can create as many projects as you want. It doesn't use up any space or anything like that. So, all right, let me then reset a little bit here in terms of what I'm sharing. Let me just talk really quickly about the homework for next week. So let me stop sharing that and let me share back to Safari. All right, so here we go. Homework, stuff to work on for the next week or the next couple of weeks. First thing is there's a discussion forum. You've now actually done 2 forums from last week, so they already should be fairly familiar. This one is going to be about us having a group discussion about what, if any, experiences you've had with games in educational settings, either ones that you've used or ones that you've been asked to use as a student, or even just sort of situations you've been in where you've seen gaming types of things being used. So it's a little bit just talk about what your experience was, a little bit of, do you think that the gaming aspect of it added anything or contributed anything to that instructional experience? Or if not, why? Did you know, especially if you were the one using the game, were you aware ahead of time of what the instructional goal was that you were supposed to try to achieve through the game? Just general questions like that. The one difference is, and I do this sometimes, this is a single thread forum. So I've already created the thread, the topic, which is just basically restating the question. Everybody should reply to that same thread. So instead of having 16 different threads that you're looking in on, we're going to have one long conversation. So it's going to be a little different, but I find it useful to do this sometimes when it's just this sort of single topic conversation because it's easier to see everybody's contributions. So, at the minimum, obviously, you should post your thoughts at some point. But then as you read through other people's parts of the conversation, feel free to throw in your replies wherever you see it, wherever you wish. So that's just a discussion forum, just to continue our thoughts about gaming. There is a mini project, and we will have a mini project for each of these weeks that we're doing Scratch. The mini project is a very specific set of instructions, and all you have to do is just follow the instructions. This is just a way for you to demonstrate that you can do the things that we went over this week in class. So this is what it looks like. It's 19 steps, but it's not as much as that because some of the steps are just create a new project, save your project. Um, and then for each step, I try to sort of highlight and bold out the key word of the instruction. So if you're adding code, that means you're going to the blocks tab for a sprite. Next costume means you're looking for a code instruction that says next costume. So I try to use the same wording that is in the coding blocks so that you can find them. Here's broadcast message. Here's set the ghost effect. So basically, it's not a lot about creativity. You just do each of the instructions, check each one off as you go. When you're done, you save the project, you share the project, and then when you do that, on the project page, you'll have an option to add to Studio, and you'll add it to our mini project number 1 Studio. And that'll just collect everybody's mini projects into one folder, basically, so that then I can look at them all at once. Okay. I did put a sample in there of the complete project. So if you want to look at that, or if you get stuck, or you just want to see what it looks like, when I did it, you can certainly feel free to open that up and look at it. Please just make sure you don't just open that up and then do a remix and then just use my copy of it. Start yours from scratch. But by all means, feel free to look at the sample just so you can see kind of how everything's supposed to work and what it looks like, and then go from there. So that is mini project. I know it says due, next week, but we really don't get back to the next Scratch class until 2 weeks from now. So if you want to take 2 weeks to get this mini project done, that's perfectly okay. I put it in this week's homework for next week just because it's this week, but our Scratch work is going to kind of be on an every other week basis. Then the final thing, and I sort of asked you to informally start thinking about this last week, but again, next week is going to mainly be about the game projects. And 2 of the things I would like to settle next week are the groups, which again, you also have the option of going by yourself if you wish. So if you want to do that, I just ask you to email me and just say, I would like to do the game project on my own. And that way, when I'm creating groups or looking to put groups together, I know not to put you in a group. But beyond that, there's a forum here. And regardless if you're going to go individual or not, I still want you to post to the forum. But the forum is just where I want you to post just very, very basic ideas of possible game topics. So if you're a math teacher, you might propose a couple of things that are math related that you think might be good to turn into a game, or another topic area. The replies are going to be your way of showing that you might be interested in working with somebody else on the topic they suggested. So, if we have multiple social studies teachers, you may look and say, oh, there's another social studies teacher and they proposed something which sounds kind of interesting. I wouldn't mind working with them together on a game. So that's what the replies should be. So if you think you're working by yourself, you actually don't have to reply to anyone because you don't want to indicate an interest in working with a group. But if you do want to work with a group, look through the suggestions as they get posted and just reply to as many of them as you think you might be interested in working with. And then what I try to do out of that is put all of that into a spreadsheet so that I can see who proposed what, who replied to each of those proposals, And then I start to look for patterns or groupings where it would make sense to have like these three people work together and these three people work together and so on. So next week, I would love to have this information in hand so that we can talk about groups next week and maybe even settle the groups. And also so that your group can start to figure out what the general topic of the game is going to be. Because after next week, you're going to be starting to do your instructional design. So you're going to want to know what you're aiming for, what topic or what subject you're looking to address. All right. So that's really it for homework. I say that's it. I know that sounds like a lot, but one discussion forum, one mini project that really you have 2 weeks to work on if you wish, and this game project forum, which is really just about trying to figure out how we can make groups out of this class to work together. Um, of those three, honestly, that third one is really the only one that's really time critical. I really do want to have that by next week's class, if not even a little ahead of next week's class, so that I can process it a little bit before we talk next week. The other two, like I said, the Scratch Mini project, you could take a couple weeks and that's no problem. The discussion forum, likewise. There's no real hard time limit on that one. So if you're going to put things in order, I would start actually with number 3 and then work your way through the other ones. All right. Phew, that was a lot. This is always the longest week with Scratch because we have to do the basic introduction and get into a couple of the bits of the program. The other weeks where we're doing this, we're just going to be focusing on other colored areas of instructions. So it's going to be a lot less to go through. You're going to be getting more and more comfortable with the platform, so we're going to not have to worry so much about covering the basics. So this is the long haul night. But after this, the other Scratch weeks should be much simpler, much smoother going. Okay. So, 2 hours, pretty much on the button. Any last questions from anyone before we bid each other good night and good week and hunker down for the weekend storm that we're supposed to get on Saturday? We're good? All right. Well, thank you all for being here. The videos from tonight will be posted maybe even by tonight or by tomorrow. Please get in touch with me with any questions, especially since we didn't really have a chance to go through those programming blocks. But just let me know if you have any questions, and I'm here to help. All right. Good night. Enjoy the rest of your evening, and we'll see you later.
Bye.